Have you ever looked at a massive, complex application and just wondered how on earth does this thing not fall apart? Well, the secret often comes down to a really powerful design pattern called N-tier architecture. Think of it as the secret blueprint for building software that's clean, scalable, and actually built to last. Let's dive in. So right off the bat, here's the million-dollar question every developer has to answer. As your application gets bigger and you keep adding new features, it can start to feel like you're playing a game of Jenga, right? One little mistake, one wrong move, and the whole structure could come tumbling down. So how do you handle all that complexity? Well, the answer, at least in concept, is surprisingly simple. The secret isn't just about writing more code. It's about building in layers. You don't just create one giant, messy blob of code. Instead, you build your application in these really distinct, organized layers, where each one has a very specific job to do. And this whole layered approach has a name: N-tier architecture. The N just means it can have any number of layers or tiers. And, the best way I've found to think about this is to picture a well-run company. This architecture is basically the org chart for your code. It tells every single part of your application what its role is and, crucially, who it reports to. All right, so let's meet the key employees in our little software company. Now, while you can have any number of tiers, most of the applications you use are built on a classic and really powerful three-tier structure. First up, we've got the presentation layer. This is the face of your application. It's everything the user actually sees and touches. Let's just call it the friendly receptionist at the front desk. The front desk's job is super specific, right? It greets the user, shows them information, takes down their request, and then passes it along to the right department. It handles things like React apps, mobile UIs, or API controllers. But, and this is the most important rule of all, it does not contain any business logic. The receptionist doesn't decide how to approve a loan, they just take the application. So who does make the decisions? Well, that power belongs to our second tier, the business logic layer. If the presentation layer is our front desk, this layer is the entire floor of managers. These are the brains of the whole operation. This is where all the important rules of your business live. Things like, is this user even allowed to see this page? Or how do we calculate the tax on this purchase? The business layer is the coordinator, taking requests from the UI and figuring out what it needs from the data layer to get the job done. And finally, way down at the foundation of our company, we have the data access layer. You can think of this as the secure records room in the basement. It's the one and only source of truth, where every piece of important information is stored, protected, and managed. This layer's only job is to talk to the database, period. Whether it's fetching a user's profile or saving a new order, all those CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. It all happens right here. This layer totally shields the rest of the application from having to know how or where the data is actually stored. Okay, so we've got our departments, but just having them isn't enough. For this whole system to work without turning into chaos, they have to follow a very, very strict set of rules about how they talk to each other. And here it is. This is the golden rule of N-tier architecture. Communication is strictly top-down. The presentation layer can only talk to the business layer, and the business layer can only talk to the data layer. That's it. Our receptionist at the front desk can't just decide to bypass the managers and barge into the secure records room. This strict chain of command is what keeps everything so incredibly orderly and secure. Okay, so that's all the theory. But to really see why this is so powerful, let's watch it in action. Let's walk through a super common real-world example, a user logging into an app. So let's trace the journey of a single login request. We're going to follow it as it travels down through our three-tiered company and then all the way back up again. All right, here we go. 1. The user types their email and password into the UI. 2. The UI bundles that up and sends the request down to the business layer. 3. The managers in the business layer check the rules. Is the email even a valid format? Is this user's account active? 4. It then asks the data layer, hey, can you go find this user for me? 5. The data layer goes to the database and pulls that user's record. 6. The record comes back up to the business layer, which then checks the password. And finally, 7, a confirmation gets sent all the way back up to the UI, which shows the user a welcome back screen. See that? A perfect, orderly round trip. And now, let's actually look at some code. This here is our front desk, the controller in the presentation layer. Look how simple it is. It literally just takes the user's request and immediately passes it off to something called the user service. It does absolutely no thinking for itself. Now we're in the manager's office, the service layer. This is where the brainpower is. First, it asks the user repository to go find the user. Then, it applies the business rules with that if statement. Does this user even exist? And if they do, does the password match? This is the core decision-making right here. And finally, we're in the records room, the repository. Look how focused this is. Its job is to get a request for a user by their email, and then it runs that one single query against the database. That's it. It's clean, it's simple, and it's totally isolated. This is a beautiful example of separation of concerns. Of course, like any tool, this architecture isn't the perfect solution for every single project out there. So let's be fair and take a quick look at the pros and the cons. So on the plus side, it's incredibly easy to maintain. A bug in the UI is not going to crash your database. You can test each layer separately, which is a lifesaver. And it's fantastic for big teams because your front-end folks and back-end folks can work at the same time without stepping on each other's toes. The downsides? Well, there can be a tiny performance hit from passing data between all these layers. And honestly, for a really small weekend project, all this structure can feel a little rigid and might slow you down at the very beginning. So, after all of that, what's the big takeaway? Why do we go through all this trouble to separate everything so carefully? Well, because this is not just some academic theory. This exact structure is the backbone of the most important applications you use every single day. We're talking massive e-commerce sites, the banking app on your phone, you name it. This is what allows those systems to be incredibly complex without becoming totally chaotic. And to wrap this all up, let me leave you with a little tip. You are almost guaranteed to hear this question in a software engineering interview. So why can't we just let the UI layer talk directly to the database? I mean, it would be faster to code, right? And now you know the answer. Because while it might seem faster in the short term, you'd be creating a tangled, fragile mess that's impossible to maintain. Enforcing that separation, that strict chain of command, is what makes an application professional, robust, and built for the long haul. It's the difference between building a temporary shack and building a skyscraper.